Welcome back to the LDA Podcast, a podcast created by the Learning Disabilities Association of America. This series is dedicated to improving the lives and education of all learners. In today's episode, we talk with educational consultant Dr. Cynthia Stadel about the school-to-prison pipeline and what schools and communities can do to end it.
Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Cynthia Stadel. She's an educational consultant out of Portland, Oregon. She's worked in federally funded literacy and GED programs for adults on probation and parole. She's also worked for the Multnomah County Department of Community Justice for 14 years and has also been working as a grant writer and consultant for nonprofits who assist folks in reentering the community following incarceration. Currently, she works for the Northeast Portland Prison in literacy instruction. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Stadel.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So can you tell us, what is the school-to-prison pipeline?
Okay, basically the school-to-prison pipeline is a term coined by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it looks at that pathway from kids who have behavior issues in the school systems, they drop out, and then they end up incarcerated. I have some stats on that. We know that on any given day in the United States, more than 2 million people are held in prisons and jails, and more than 100,000 juveniles are held in custody. And
Wow.
what we know, yes, is that risk of incarceration does not impact all populations equally. We know that a disproportionate number of those incarcerated are people of color. But today I want to draw attention to another overrepresented group, and those are folks with disabilities. And so a snapshot, and this speaks to your question about that school-to-prison pipeline. Students with disabilities are more than twice as likely to receive out-of-school suspension than students without disabilities. And those who are suspended are more likely to drop out. So we saw from the national a longitudinal study done several years ago that the dropout rate for youth with learning disabilities is higher than that of the general population of youth. And dropping out puts youth at risk for incarceration. So you've got 31% of those dropping out were arrested, compared with only 8% of those youth who stay in school. But when you look deeper, those who dropped out of school and who had learning disabilities were arrested at a rate of nearly 45%.
Wow.
So that's your school-to-prison pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
So you have kids who are in school. I've watched, done functional behavioral analyses, watched kids, where are they having difficulty? Where are they sent to the principal? They're having difficulty in reading or math, stuff like that, and they can't get the subject matter. They begin acting out. They're sent to the principal's office, and then it flows from there. They're suspended, and you start having those kinds of encounters with law enforcement.
So it sounds like they struggle academically and they don't want the focus on them to be on their academic struggles, so tend to act out, and then that leads to discipline issues, which then
Correct.
kind of just
Right.
perpetuates into...
Exactly. And if you have a school that isn't sensitive to what's going on with the individual child and not intervening appropriately and falls back on suspensions, you're setting them up for entry into another system.
It's crazy.
The criminal justice system, it is crazy. It is crazy.
So how do we even go about helping schools or youth in general respond to this phenomenon?
I really think that school culture is critical. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you have proactive school administrators who set a framework for a positive school culture, that goes a long way, in addressing, you could address about 80% of the behavior issues if you frame a positive culture, where people are treated to be safe, or the expectations are that students and faculty are safe, they're respectful, and they're responsible. And then that takes care of a huge majority of behavior issues. And then you can zero in on kids who are having specific issues, but that narrows it from the entire school having problems to a smaller band. Mm-hmm. And then you can deal with those and provide the appropriate evaluations and then accommodations. I'm very much aware that it's frequently a culture issue. Mm-hmm. And I see that also in the prisons, mm-hmm. Where if you've got a culture that is respectful, you can do much more, than one that is punitive.
So as a society, I guess, we talked about the school system, but school doesn't happen during the summer, only happens for 6.5 hours a day. Right. What should the community or families be doing as preventative strategies before students become involved in the juvenile justice system?
Right. Well, certainly. So supporting families mm-hmm. With tutoring programs and that kind of thing, but making those available not just to parents who can afford them, mm-hmm. but to low-income folks. And so one of the things I see in the prison system is you've got folks, I work with folks who have undiagnosed disabilities frequently. And it's easy for me with folks on learning disabilities to look at that. But really, you've got a lot of comorbidity disorders going on. So folks have problems with substance abuse, mental health issues. In the prison system, we see a lot of head injury, self-reported head injury, multiple issues, and trauma, which is exacerbated then by the prison system itself. Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with parents who have a lot of issues who haven't been addressed. And frequently, as I said, they're parents. They have children too. Mm-hmm. So part of that is addressing the needs of the adults, mm-hmm. their own reading and literacy needs. So they're taking care of that small child within themselves that wasn't responded to perhaps, so that they in turn then can advocate for their children. And but beyond that, making programming available through the summer so that kids who need assistance and can't afford the private tutors can get that help. And frequently in Portland, it might be working with a college or university that has a teacher training program that can provide training to incoming or teachers, who can provide that training during the summer.
So it sounds like this might even be an equity issue.
Very much so. Yeah. Very much so. Thank you for bringing that up.
So for students that are already involved in the juvenile justice system, uh-huh. What are prisons doing to help them in their areas of struggle so that they don't become adults in the system? In the system, yeah.
I'm not as familiar with the juvenile justice system. I've mm-hmm. been more engaged with the adult system. Yep. But so I can't really speak to that. Okay. I know that in Multnomah County we had the introduction of a Read 180 program that was addressing kids with adolescents with literacy issues. But beyond that, I can't really say. I've worked more with the adults, and what I saw in Portland, we have in Oregon 14 prisons, and one in Northeast Portland that incarcerates men releasing to the Portland metropolitan area. And that prison has a GED program, which one instructor from Portland Community College who coordinates that. And again, it's a lot of computer-assisted learning supplemented by inmates who are tutors. That works for inmates who are reading at a 9th grade level or above. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work for those who are reading at lower levels. So that's where Multnomah County Library instituted an outreach program, and I was able to work with them, and so I'm now working with inmates who are functioning below that 8th grade level. But so you asked, what can you do? And I'm a big proponent of structured literacy programs. Mm-hmm. And when I worked with Multnomah County and was hired to start a literacy and GED program years ago, I found that it was, and we also, the grant that funded that program provided for computer-assisted learning. Mm-hmm. So that's where we started. But again, we saw that wasn't addressing the needs of really low-level readers. We had a volunteer come in who was trained in Massachusetts as an Orton Gillingham person, and she was willing and equipped to work with very low-level readers, adults. Mm-hmm. And so that really propelled me then to get Orton Gillingham training and eventually move to incorporating Wilson curricula within that learning center. So I carry that experience with me. Mm-hmm. and saw lots of positive effects from that.
So when working with the adults that are in prison and they're getting this literacy instruction, does it change their social emotional well-being, their confidence? Like, what are they, I mean, they're gaining literacy skills, but what else are they gaining?
Well, that is huge in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So, and again, what we've started with this prison project, and it's a pilot, and it's recent. We just started back in September. So, recruiting folks. And at first, folks were, men incarcerated were very unwilling to disclose that they had learning issues, right? Mm-hmm. So, but we were using a CASAS assessment within that intake process, and we could see really low CASAS scores. We were pulling those in, doing some screening, and then I began working with them one-on-one, and then experimenting with Wilson's Tier 2 intervention program, the Just Words curriculum, and started to get some really positive response. What I saw was that some of the inmates that were working also in treatment programs, a treatment component, were saying that they could really grasp the curriculum much better. So you saw impacts, positive impacts on their treatment, and so that was positive. But the other piece that really struck me was, grown adults literally weeping and saying, "I wish I had had this when I was younger." And these are folks that had dropped out of school at 8th grade or a little bit later. So
they recognize that their education was cut short because they couldn't read. Exactly. And this led them from one place to another and where they are now.
Exactly. They talked about, going for the street, and using and getting involved in a criminal lifestyle that left them incarcerated or led to incarceration.
So many of the people that you work with, will their prison sentences be up soon? And what did they feel like they could do after being released, now that they have some skills?
Right. Well, and so that's a concern I have. What we know is that 95% of the folks who are incarcerated will be released to their communities. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important that there is a bridge back into the community where they continue to get that support. And so that's the reentry work. Yeah. And so that needs to be really buttressed throughout the country. The Department of Labor right now has funded a number of programs that focus on equipping either work source centers or nonprofits to better accommodate folks coming back into the community. And a lot more of that needs to be done because it's not just the reading, obviously. Yeah. It's the access to the workforce. Mm-hmm.
So for those that are listening, what can we as citizens do to help support this integration, or to even do preventative measures before juvenile justice becomes the child's only option and leads to incarceration? So what could we as informed citizens do?
Well, part of it is realizing that there isn't just one answer. Mm-hmm. It has to be, it's complex. And the issues of crime and our whole incarceration system are complex. So, it really starts with each of us and our own willingness to grow and be lifelong learners, and extend that to our children, and then extend that to our neighbors, working with our schools and making certain that our schools are inclusive and that the programs that are offered in our school buildings And the culture that we create there is welcoming and supportive of all students. Mm-hmm. And so that's one piece. Then another piece is as folks get engaged in the criminal justice system and recognizing that engagement, is part of a community's desire for safety, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to create safe communities, but then being willing to ask the questions, what's going on with this individual? What kinds of supports can we provide this individual to turn this life around? Mm-hmm. Again, recognizing that they're going to be coming back into our communities. Mm-hmm. When people come back, that whole issue of background checks and that exclude people from employment. So we've said, okay, you've done your time, but then you come back in to the community. Barrier. We have another barrier. Exactly. So in Oregon, there's a big movement to so-called ban the box that says, do you have a criminal history? Mm-hmm. And so that you ban that box and you get individuals and you're asking them, are you qualified to do the job we want you to do? Mm-hmm. And you don't ask at the front end, do you have a criminal history?
Because that screens people out. Correct. Right from the beginning.
Exactly. And as an employer, what you want is folks who can do the job. And then yes, down the road, you can, are there risks? Mm-hmm. But that's down the road. And we work with employers who are very open, to working with folks who have criminal histories, because the reality is so many of us have family members who are in the system, mm-hmm. and we can identify.
Yep. And then getting rid of the box eliminates bias right from the beginning, because correct. There's probably a whole lot of bias towards this population.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So thank you for your time today, Cynthia. You have given us a wealth of information and a lot to think about in terms of what we do in society and what we could be doing to really create that inclusive and supportive society you talked about.
Well, you know what? I was really impressed with the speaker here at the LDA conference where mm-hmm. we are, and John King, and he was talking about the need to see the humanity of each individual. And I think that's just really, really critical. Mm-hmm. And then we need to build bridges of support, as you mentioned earlier. Yeah. And that was another theme in his talk, and I think that's really critical. All of us need those bridges of support.
Yep. All of us need to be able to network and
exactly.
and not burn bridges and
exactly.
feel like nobody burned a bridge for us,
exactly.
which I'm sure many of these
right.
incarcerated
right.
individuals feel.
And what we know is that when we burn bridges, we need to go back and repair them. Mm-hmm. We don't abandon them.
Yep. Thank you for your time, Cynthia.
So
I appreciate this conversation.
Good conversation. Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the LDA podcast. This podcast is made possible by the Learning Disabilities Foundation of America. The music from today's episode includes Little Idea by Scott Holmes. In our next episode, we talk about parenting strategies for children with learning disabilities with John Wilson, Executive Director at SOAR. For more resources from LDA, visit ldaamerica.org.